So, we are going to continue with what we were discussing in the last class. So, this lecture will be on the learning mechanisms in neural networks, but especially we will consider on the three types of learning mechanism. One is the Hebbian learning, which we had left incomplete in the last class, and then we are also going to discuss about the competitive learning, and finally the fifth mechanism, which is the Boltzmann learning. So, this will be the scope of our discussion for today. In fact, as you had seen in the last class, that we can define 5 basic learning rules, okay, and out of that error correction learning and the memory based learning we have already discussed, and it was Hebbian learning which we were considering towards the end of the class. In fact, for Hebbian learning, as we had discussed already, that it is quite supported by the neurophysiological evidence that our brain also performs to some extent, at least some region of the brain do perform this kind of a Hebbian learning. And the mechanism that follows for the Hebbian learning is that when a cell fires another cell, in that case the metabolic process should be such that the synaptic connection of such cells, okay, they are strengthened, meaning that next time there will be a greater strength of cell A firing the cell B, okay. And this, when translated in terms of the neural network, we had seen that we can define it this way, that if you have two neurons, one defined as the presynaptic neuron and the other as the postsynaptic neuron, connected to each other by the synaptic weight, okay. In that case, if at a given time instant both the synaptic, both the presynaptic as well as the postsynaptic, they show the similar excitation, if both of them are active together, okay, in that case the synaptic connection of that will be strengthened, okay. So, that is the essentially what we are going to have for the artificial neural network when we implement the Hebbian learning mechanism, okay. So, such synapses we are referring to as the Hebbian synapses. So, it is Hebbian synapses, and Hebbian synapses has got 3 characteristics. Firstly is that it is very much time dependent. So, as we already emphasized that the presynaptic and the postsynaptic neurons activation, okay, they should be occurring at the same time. That is to say that they must occur synchronously. So, if they are not synchronous, if they are asynchronous in nature, then we are not going to have the strengthening, then we are going to follow a weakening. So, it is very much time dependent. The second thing is that it is highly local in nature. That means to say that the synaptic weight adjustment is very much dependent upon the postsynaptic and the presynaptic neuron only. So, it is absolutely local, okay. It is not dependent upon the other neurons. So, it is definitely following a kind of a spatiotemporal contiguity. And the third thing is that it is strongly interactive, and strong interactivity in this case means that there are true interactions between both the ends of the synapse. So, if we consider the synapse, then the presynaptic and the postsynaptic neurons, okay, they are surely interactive with each other, okay. Now, as we had already shown that the positive correlation, okay, if the presynaptic and the postsynaptic, they happen to be positively correlated, then the positive correlation leads to a synaptic strengthening. whereas if they happen to be uncorrelated in the sense that one does not affect the other, okay, then we can say that it is uncorrelated, or it could be negatively correlated. Like, I mean, if it is such that, supposing we define a binary state of the neurons, it could be in the +1 state or -1 state, and for such kind of binary activations, if it is such that when cell A, which is to be regarded as the presynaptic, that goes to a state of +1, and the postsynaptic that is at a state of -1 at the same time synchronously, then we can define that to be a negative correlation. And a Hebbian mechanism simply means that in case of such negative correlation, we can have a, I mean, we are going to have a synaptic weakening. Okay. Now, this is surely what we can I mean expect, that positive correlation should lead to strengthening and negative correlation should lead to weakening, but whether uncorrelated should lead to a strengthening or a weakening, or it remains the same, that is one issue on which one can debate upon. Okay. So, although I said here that uncorrelated, I mean any kind of uncorrelation between the presynaptic and the postsynaptic neurons, okay, they lead to weakening. I mean, one can also define the Hebbian learning mechanism in such a way that there is neither strengthening nor weakening. In fact, based on this, we can develop 3 different classifications for synaptic modifications. So, the classifications of synaptic modification could be stated as follows. One mechanism is the Hebbian synaptic modification, as we have already seen that the synapse that increases its strength with positive correlation. A second category of synaptic modification one can think over, okay, that is called as the anti-Hebbian. And what is anti-Hebbian? Anti-Hebbian means something that behaves exactly opposite to how the Hebbian learning mechanism behaves. That means to say that if you have negative correlation, if one end of the synapse is -1 and the other end of the synapse is +1, in that case you should strengthen that. Okay. So, that means to say that the synapse in the case of anti-Hebbian, it increases its strength, but not with positive correlation, but with negative correlation. And the third classification that we are going to define is a non-Hebbian. And what is a non-Hebbian? Non-Hebbian means that which does not involve Hebbian mechanism of either kind. Is it okay? I think it is fairly simple to understand that strengthening, I mean Hebbian means with positive correlation there is a strengthening, anti-Hebbian means with negative correlation there is a strengthening, and vice versa. I mean that means to say that when you have anti-Hebbian and there is a positive correlation, it leads to weakening obviously. And non-Hebbian means which does not follow either Hebbian or anti-Hebbian. Okay. Now, we are going to see the mathematical model for Hebbian modifications. Okay. Now, when stated in a very simple way, okay, so this is the mathematical model of Hebbian modifications. And this can be stated as follows, that delta Wkj, okay, at the time step n, okay, that is surely a function of Ykn and Xjn, and I think we have already defined the nomenclature for this. It necessarily means that Wkj happens to be the synaptic strength between the neuron J and the neuron K. Okay. From neuron J to neuron K, that means to say, and Xj is the input neuron and Yk is the output, and what you are seeing within the parenthesis n is the definition that we have at the time step n. Now, surely the change of weight that has to take place has to be a function of the presynaptic, that is Xj of n is the presynaptic signal and Yk of n which happens to be the postsynaptic signal. So, it is definitely a function of that. And if we are going to have a positive correlation, as is the case with the Hebbian synapse, in that case one has to show the positive correlation in the form of some mathematical expression, because just telling function f does not mean that whether it is showing a positive correlation or a negative correlation, it can show either. Now, it is according to Hebb's hypothesis that we can define the delta Wkj at the time step n as the product of the postsynaptic and the presynaptic signals, which means to say Yk of n times Xj of n, not exactly a product, but the product multiplied by the learning rate. So, eta as usual is our learning rate. So, it is eta Ykn Xjn. In fact, this expression, the one which I had just now written, this is defined as the activity product rule. This is also called the activity product rule. Now, if we plot these, okay, in fact, by keeping Xj constant, let us say that we keep the Xj constant, we vary Yk, okay. Eta is of course a constant because eta is a learning parameter. So, keeping eta constant, keeping the Xj also constant, we plot delta Wkj versus Yk. So, what is it going to be? It is going to be a straight line that passes through the origin simply. So, its curve is going to be simply this, that we will be having Yk on this axis and delta Wkj on the y axis, and according to Hebb's hypothesis we are going to have a straight line of slope is equal to eta xj, okay, and this straight line, okay, is going to obviously pass through the origin. That is very clear from here, right. So, now if we analyze the behavior of this network, okay, what is it going to be? Okay. Supposing we keep the xj's strength the same, let us say that we keep the xj to be the same. That means to say that according to this curve we will be getting some Yk, okay, and that necessarily means that there is a delta Wkj, some positive delta Wkj will be there, okay, supposing already the Wkj is positive, okay. So, whenever we have got a constant xj, then we will be having a positive Yk necessarily, and positive Yk will mean that there is a positive delta Wkj. which means to say that Wkj furthermore increases. So, if we begin with say this value of this value of Yk, let us say, okay, we are going to have this much of delta Wkj added to our Wkj. So, the next time in the next time step, the Wkj that we are going to have is Wkj plus delta Wkj, and that will necessarily mean that with the same Xj, with a constant Xj, we are going to have an increased Yk. An increased Yk necessarily means that we are going to have an increased Wkj. An increased Wkj will mean that weight will be furthermore increased. So, Yk will be furthermore increased, and this keeps building up. So, in the end what happens? Where is the limit? So, it is going to have an exponential growth, isn't it? I mean, we are going to show the delta Wkj versus Yk, but if we are seeing Wkj versus Yk, okay, in that case it is going to follow an exponential growth surely. And where is the limit? Where does it end? Does it continue forever? Does it continue? Does it continuously I mean, will it continuously take place? No. Certainly there has to be somewhere some saturation. So, there will be a stage where the synaptic weight or the synaptic strength reaches its saturation value, and beyond that point there will not be any further learning, right. So, obviously this poses some kind of a limitation. Okay. Now, the original Hebb's hypothesis has been somewhat modified by proposing what is called as the covariance hypothesis. In the case of covariance hypothesis, we are going to take a very similar kind of a mechanism, that is delta Wkj will still be treated as a function of Yk and Xj, but only thing is that in the case of the covariance hypothesis, we are not going to take the product as it is, not eta Yk Xj, but instead of taking it to be Yk and Xj, we are going to consider its strength above some average value. Okay. So, if we define some time averaged value of Xj and some time averaged value of Yk, okay, let us say that X bar is the time averaged value of Xj, and let us take Y bar to be the time averaged value of Yk, right. So, this we can then write the covariance hypothesis as delta Wkj equal to eta Xj minus X bar Yk minus Y bar. Okay. And in this case, if we keep the synaptic strength to be, I mean, if we take the input to be the same, let us say that we keep the input at Xj only, and I mean its average does not mean that it is average for the Xj only, I mean average over the entire system. I mean, if you are having several inputs which you are going to have surely. So, considering its average effect, which is going to be X bar, so X bar also will be some constant. I mean, at a given time X bar is going to be a constant and Xj is also going to be a constant. Okay. And then let us see that what the learning means in this case. So, in this case, if we are going to plot the same thing, that is delta Wkj we plot as a function of Yk. In this case, what happens is that we are also going to get the same straight line. I mean, we are also going to get a straight line in this case, but in this case the slope of that straight line is going to be not eta Xj, but eta xj minus x bar. So, we are going to have the slope of the line as eta xj minus x bar. So, this is going to be the slope of the straight line that we are going to draw over here, and this straight line, when you draw it fully, that should intersect with the y axis at which point? It is going to intersect it as minus eta xj minus x bar y bar. That is good, right. So, it is going to intersect over here, and this is going to be our maximum depression point. So, in this case you can see that it is not that all the time delta Wkj has to increase only. Delta Wkj, I mean when Yk is equal to y bar, in that case delta Wkj is going to be equal to 0, and above that it is going to be positive, above below that it is going to be negative. So, covariance hypothesis has got a stability effect. Yes, any questions on this?
What do you mean by time average value of xj?
Time average value of xj means you take all the xj's, all the inputs, okay, and its time averaged behavior, its time averaged strength, that is all.
Then why are you considering xj as constant in the given slope?
See, this is only the learning equation, okay. That means to say that for a given xj, okay, we are going to find out that how much of delta Wkj we are having, all right. So, I mean once that is adjusted, so during the time on which you are updating this Wkj, you are assuming that the signal strength is not changing, okay. In fact, I mean this is true for a stationary environment. One thing which I think you must try to think of, that neural network, when we are putting neural network into any practical system, okay, that time one inherent assumption that we have to make it is that the neural network is working in a stationary environment. Stationary environment in the sense that its environment is not dynamically changing. It is not that within the time which you take in order to adjust this weight delta Wk, I mean by an amount delta Wkj, the input also changes. Although strictly speaking it is not always very practical, you may be having some kind of non-stationarity also, in which case the neural network has to be more adaptive to non-stationary behavior. But even non-stationary behavior also means that for a very short time we can model it as a stationary. So, I mean there is nothing wrong in assuming that the input is going to remain at the same strength by the time this delta Wkj is arranged. Any other question?
So, what that means is then if we have a series of inputs,
Yeah.
then x bar is an average of all those inputs.
Which is equal to xj.
X bar is an average of all those inputs, very
Then
correct.
why should all those inputs affect my weight from this xj to yk? Why should all the other inputs affect this weight?
This is just an average behavior, from an average behavior point of view, okay, that okay, I mean if you are I mean assuming that all the inputs are equally likely, okay, in a system, okay, it is not that always you have to take it to be the average over the system. I mean you can consider that even xj also may be slowly changing, okay. So, you could take an averaged effect of that, depends what type of time averaging you are doing. I mean doing average over the set of neurons that you are having, or doing average over only the neuron that you are considering, okay. It is only over and above some average that we are considering in the case of a covariance hypothesis. Okay. Now, one thing that, yes please.
So in this it means for some particular value of yk output,
Yeah.
then the weight may decrease also.
Exactly so. In fact, I mean, we can summarize it as follows, that the Wkj is going to increase, the increase I am just denoting by this symbol, okay, if xj happens to be x bar, that means to say that suddenly if it's, in fact, I mean, let me answer to the earlier question in a better way, that instead of taking it to be, I mean, if you are having any I mean, problems in imagining that how is it going to be over a system, let us consider only one presynaptic and one postsynaptic neuron only. Okay. Even then also there is no harm in conceptualizing that, okay, x bar is the time averaged strength of xj. All right. So, this is as it is. So, that means to say that if it is such that xj is greater than x bar, okay, and yk is greater than y bar, in that case wkj is going to be increasing. That is very clear from here, because xj minus x bar is positive, yk minus y bar is positive, eta is positive, delta wkj is positive. That means to say wkj increases in its strength. Okay. So, that is one of the behavior, and we are also going to have a decrease of wkj, wkj decreasing if what, either we have that xj is greater than x bar and yk less than y bar. If that is the case, then wkj decreases in strength, or also the other way, that means to say if we have xj less than x bar and yk greater than y bar. Okay. So, this is what the covariance hypothesis is giving us. Okay.
So then we can have one, if xj is less than x bar and yk is less than y bar.
Exactly. If xj is less than x bar and yk is less than y bar, then also you are going to have an increase, which is obviously Hebbian. That means to say that if both xj and yk, they are decreasing from their average strength, then you are going to strengthen it up. So, again xj less than x bar and yk less than y bar necessarily means that the presynaptic and the postsynaptic neurons are again positively correlated. Is it? Okay. So, in fact, there is a strong physiological evidence of Hebbian learning going on in our brain. In fact, the area of the brain which is called as the hippocampus, okay, this is one region of the brain where there is a strong physiological evidence that we are adopting a Hebbian learning mechanism. So, it is physiologically very much supported, and in fact, it is the physiological support, okay, that made the Hebbian learning mechanism quite popular. All right.
So, this covariance hypothesis in fact supports Hebbian process of learning. It's saying the same.
Covariance is indeed supporting the Hebbian. Only thing is that here the behavior is defined with respect to the average value, correct. So, it is there that it is going to stabilize. You see that when is it stabilized, okay, that means to say that the point where there is no further delta wkj taking place, that is at its average value, okay, that is at this point, okay, where is it going to be stabilized. Any other questions, any other observations that you would like to add at this point? Okay, good. So, we can go over to the next mechanism of learning, which we can call as the competitive learning. Competitive learning. Yes, please. Please feel free to ask questions.
This line, it can have delta wkj as 0. So
Delta wkj as 0, yes.
to the constant value.
Delta wkj, yes, if delta wkj is equal to 0, in that case there is no further updating of weight that is taking place. In fact, that means to say that it is within its average behavior. Okay. We do not have to modify its strength, support it. I mean, that is what the covariance mechanism is telling us, that if it is doing its average mechanism, I mean if it is following its average behavior, you need not have to alter it. What you have to do is that if both are going in the same way, strengthen it. Okay. If one is going this way, other is going other way, okay, weaken it. That is simply what it is saying. That is the translated form of the Hebbian rule. Your observations are absolutely very correct. So, I think with this in mind, we can proceed to the next variant of the learning mechanism, which we are calling as the competitive learning. Now, again competitive learning is something which is quite interesting. Okay. You see, so far what we have seen for the Hebbian is that we had considered existence of two neurons, right, presynaptic, postsynaptic. In fact, that is, I mean, not the only two neurons in the system. There will be many other such neurons existing in the system, and so that means to say that typically there will be several inputs, several outputs. Okay. They will be connected to each other by synaptic weights. Now, a Hebbian mechanism means that there could be that more than one number of output neurons active, remaining active. That is quite possible, that more than one output neurons could remain active, because I mean it is not restricting anything, that only one of the output neurons will be active and at the cost of others. Okay. Now, what happens in the case of competitive learning is that, okay, something like a rat race. You see, in a competition what happens? In a competition, okay, there are, I mean, several competitors. I mean, in any competition, take a competition in a real life. What you have? You have several persons who are competing. Let us say that the first position in the class, I mean being the topper of the class, okay, it is competitive. Okay. Now, what you are having is that you are receiving the same set of inputs. I mean, all of you are listening to the same lectures from the teachers. Okay. All of you are reading from the same books more or less, okay, unless one suddenly finds out some some text material which he does not want to disclose to the others. Okay, that also happens. In fact, I am coming to that. Okay, but otherwise, I mean, given a situation that everybody is listening to the lecture, I mean to the same set of lectures, everybody is also having the same text, I mean the prescribed texts are also the same, and there is a competition. What happens is that out of, let us say, 40 students in the class, okay, one is going to be the topper and other 39 are not going to be the topper, right, simple mechanism. Now, here what happens is that, I mean, the set of inputs will be all your learning materials, lecture notes, etc., and outputs will be your final performance, and I am not referring to the marks that the students are getting, only a classification that somebody is a topper and somebody is not a topper. I mean, something like a binary classification that we are getting. Now, here what happens is that the topper and the other competitors, I mean there are several competitors, there are 40 competitors who are existing in the class. Now, we not only get and strengthen our, I mean those who are competing, they not only try to strengthen themselves with the kind of inputs that they receive, not only that, they also try to weaken others. Okay? I mean it happens, I mean do not tell me that it does not happen in real life, it can happen. In fact, I mean if you find a very good material, okay, for study, okay, then I mean you may disclose it to a friend who is not going to be your close competitor, but if you are contemplating to be the topper of the class, okay, certainly you are not going to tell all this information to the person who is closely following you in the rank, I mean who also is equally competing in order to become the topper. Okay. So, that means to say that there is some kind of a relative inhibition between the competitors. So, the competitors, they are inhibiting amongst themselves, but they are trying to strengthen the I mean all the connections which are there in the feed forward mechanism. Feed forward mechanism means from the learning material to the output performance, there whatever is the flow, there it is being strengthened, and within the competitors it is getting weakened. And finally, it is one who is the winner, okay, the others are loser. Now, in real life, it is such that if one person becomes the winner, okay, if he is the topper of the class this time, okay, it does not mean that in the next semester, okay, he is going to repeat the same performance, or there is any special preference for that person who has become the topper. Okay. I mean, in fact, I mean it should not be done that way, that we support the person who has already become a topper, we try to help him more so that he becomes the topper next time. Okay. We do not do that, we try to have equal opportunities for all once again. So, if somebody has become a topper in this semester, well and fine, he is the topper of this semester, but next semester again it will be based on equal opportunity of learning, and next semester somebody else could be a topper. But in the case of neural network, what happens is that if somebody is a topper, okay, then he will be favored. He will be favored in the sense that the synaptic connections will be so modified that next time it will be easy for him to become a topper. Something like an examiner who will follow the policy of partiality, you know, that if I know that a student is already good, I mean he is the topper of the class, then I will try to give him more marks and I will help him in becoming the topper. Okay. Something of that mechanism, but it happens in the case of competitive learning. That means to say that in the case of competitive learning, what happens is that the winner, okay, will be favored next time. So, winner will have preference in terms of the synaptic connections. Okay. So, this is the spirit of the competitive learning. So, in the case of competitive learning, what we are going to have is of course, some input layer. Okay. Let us say that this is a layer of source neurons, okay, and then we are going to have an output layer. Okay. Supposing we just show 3 neurons which are there in the output layer. Okay. And now, in the case of competitive learning, they will be fully interconnected. Fully interconnected means that all these 4 inputs will be connected to all the output neurons, followed. So, this will be connected to these 4. Okay. Let us say that this is output neuron 1, let us say, okay, or let us number the neuron 1, 2, 3, 4, and supposing this is the output layer wise, we are going to call it as, let us say, 5, 6, 7. So, I can say that this is W 5 1, W 5 2, W 5 3 and W 5 4. Okay. And likewise, we will be having W 6 1, W 6 2, W 6 3 and W 6 4, and likewise we are going to have W 7 1, W 7 2, W 7 3 and W 7 4. Okay. So, all these 3 neurons who are supposed to be competing amongst themselves, they are connected to the same set of inputs. Okay. Why? Okay, that reason you think over later on. Okay, everything I should not tell you, but here you see another. So all these things, I mean all these connections that I have shown so far, that means to say these connections that I have already indicated by the arrows, they are the feed forward connection. Feed forward connection. In fact, the feed forward connections, they are excitatory in nature. They are all excitatory connections. Okay. And over and above the excitatory connection in the feed forward, we are also going to have some feedback connections or interconnections between the outputs themselves. So, like what? 5 connected to 6, 6 connected to 5, okay, 6 connected to 7, 7 connected to 6, 5 connected to 7, 7 connected to 5. Now, all these connections I have deliberately drawn with dotted path, meaning that all the feedback connections which I have drawn with a different color of pen, okay, all these feedback connections, they are going to be inhibitory in nature. That means to say that the competitors never support themselves. Okay. They only try to weaken the other competitors. Okay. Now, what happens is that the competitive learning network, okay, follows a mathematical model like this. It's going to follow a very simple mathematical model. It says that yk, that is the output of the kth unit, the output kth unit will be equal to 1 if Vk, what is Vk? Again the combined response. Okay. If Vk is greater than Vj for all j, right, where j is not equal to k, right, and yk is equal to 0 otherwise. Okay. This mathematical definition is not at all difficult to follow. It just follows from the definition of the competition itself. That means to say that if Vk happens to be the highest amongst all the neurons, then that is going to be the winner, and if it is the winner, its output yk is going to be 1, and otherwise if Vk is not greater than Vj, at least for some j's Vk is not greater than Vj, then it is surely a loser. Then we have got more output strength available with some other neurons, and that is going to be the winner, but certainly not this one. So, this is the very basic definition. Okay. And another thing which a competitive learning network, okay, always constrains is that the sum total of the weights, okay, to a particular neuron. That is to say that if we consider the neuron k, then the summation of wkj, okay, meaning what? That for the kth neuron, all the inputs that it is receiving, if you sum them up, that means to say that if you sum them up over j, in this particular example, if you sum it up for j is equal to 1 to 4, okay, then the summation of wkj will be equal to 1 for all k. Okay. This is another constraint that we define on the weights. That means to say that the sum total of the weights, sum total of the synaptic weights to any output neuron is going to be 1, meaning that summation of w 5.1, 5.2, 5.3 and 5.4 is going to be 1. Likewise, summation of w 6.1, 6.2, 6.3 and 6.4, they are going to be 1. Okay. And now, we are going to define the competitive learning rule. So, every learning mechanism has got learning rule, which we have understood by now. So, competitive learning rule states that delta wkj, again delta wkj means how much of change of weight you are going to do. in that case the rule is pretty simple. It says that Wkj is equal to Xj minus Wkj if neuron K wins the competition, if neuron K wins the competition, okay, and delta Wkj is equal to 0 if neuron K loses. Okay. Again, think of its significance. This means to say what? That we are clearly favoring the winning neuron. In what sense? That if the neuron is loser, we do not bother to readjust its weight. If supposing 5 is the loser, if neuron 5 is the loser, in that case we are going to keep W51, W53, W53 and W54 as it is without doing any modification. And supposing out of these 3 neurons W5, 6 and 7, it so happens how? That the set of inputs that you feed, alright, the set of inputs that you feed is such that, and the existing connections are such that neuron 6 becomes the winner. In that case, what we are going to do is that we are going to adjust the weights of W61, 62, 63 and 64. Okay, so we are only going to adjust the weights of the winning neuron. But again, are we going to increase the strengths of all the connections which are there to a winning neuron? Yes or no? No, we are not going to increase everything, because again we are constrained by this expression. So if 6 is the winner, that necessarily means that summation of W61, 62, 63 and 64, that is going to be equal to 1. That means to say that if we decide to increase, let us say 1 or 2 out of them, supposing we decide to increase W61 and W64, maybe to maintain this equation, that is summation of Wkj equal to 1, we will have to reduce some, so that in total summation of Wkj is going to be equal to 1. That adjustment we need to do. So, here what do you conclude out of this? This means to say that if Xj is very close to Wkj, then you are not adjusting the weight. But if Xj is much deviated from Wkj, then you are going to adjust it heavily. Heavily in what direction? Then you are going to have delta Wkj as a large quantity. So, you are going to increase Wkj. Please follow my point. If you have Xj much greater than Wkj, then Xj minus Wkj is going to be a large quantity. Delta Wkj is going to be large. That means to say that you are increasing Wkj. That means to say that next time you are going to have even more delta Wkj value or lesser delta Wkj value, lesser Wkj value. That means to say that now that Wkj has already increased, next time delta Wkj is going to be small, okay. But even then there will be some positive delta Wkj. So, in the next iteration Wkj will again increase, not by the earlier amount, but somewhat it is going to increase, and likewise Wkj is going to follow what? Xj. So, ultimately Wkj is going to be what Xj is. So, that means to say that the connection weights that we have to follow, okay, those connection weights will necessarily be of that of the input pattern to which it has become a winner. Mind you, the very fact that the neuron K has become a winner for a particular pattern does not mean that the neuron K is going to be a winner for all the patterns. Topper of one subject, or the person securing the highest marks in one subject, doesn't mean that he is going to get highest marks in all the subjects. Okay. For a different subject, someone else may be the topper. Okay. So, likewise for a different pattern, maybe that for a particular set of patterns 6 is the winner and we are going to favor 6 for that. Favor 6 in one sense that whatever connection strengths we are going to have, those connection strengths will be as per this inputs 1, 2, 3, 4. And what is going to be the and next time another pattern we feed for a different pattern, maybe the 5 will be the winner, maybe for a different pattern 7 will be the winner, maybe for another pattern, I mean for which 6 is already a winner, it does not mean that 6 will be winner for only one particular pattern. Any pattern that is close to the pattern which has caused its winning, okay, there also 6 could continue to be a winner, well possible. I mean we could be feeding a large number of patterns, and in a typical situation let us say that here we have only 3 neurons in the competition. So, I mean basically it is an open competition only, but the thing is that what we observe out of this competitive learning rule is that this rule has the overall effect of moving the synaptic weight vector Wk. So, what is this Wk vector? Wk vector means the vector that we will be having as Wk1, Wk2 etc. up to Wkm, let us say, where m is the number of inputs. Okay. So, this Wk vector, and if x is another vector whereby we define the inputs. Okay. So, if these are the set of the inputs x1 to xm, okay, then the competitive learning rule has got the effect of moving Wk vector towards the input pattern vector x vector. Okay. Now, I mean I can explain this thing in a little more lucid way, okay, and I will do that in the next class, okay, taking a kind of a geometrical analogy, okay, for the competitive learning. And although I mean I promise that I will be doing the Boltzmann learning in this class, but we are running short of time. So, in the next class we will consider the geometrical interpretation, then the Boltzmann learning, and also go over to the next topic. Is there any question? Yes, please. Yes. All the neurons. So, I have said the summation Wkg equal to 1 for all k.
How about one of the connection is boosted?
No, if one of the connections, see this you have to maintain, that means to say that the connection will be such that one will be boosted, one will be weakened. You see, again another constraint will follow on the input pattern itself, that you cannot arbitrarily select any input pattern. The input pattern also follow a constraint. Okay. Like say for example, input pattern of constant Euclidean length. Okay. In that case, if you are having some inputs high, there will be some inputs which has to be low.
Sir, it may be possible that Ykj becomes greater than xj.
Ykj becoming greater than xj. Yes, we are not ruling out that possibility. No, but Ykj in this case is a binary. I mean either winning the competition or losing the competition. Simply.
Wkj becomes greater than xj.
Wkj, yes. I mean in this case there will be some Wkjs which are greater than xj, and there are some Wkjs which are less than xjs. So, well, yes, you are very correct, but there this eta has to play a role. That if the eta is small, then the oscillation will be less, but if the eta is large, then the possibility of oscillation could be more. Yes.
So we talk about these weights being modified, that is the weights from the inputs to the output layer.
Yes.
How do the interconnection between the outputs modify? Will they modify or will they not?
Yes, I mean actually speaking, the inhibitory connections are not mandatory, okay, but inhibitory connections may exist over and above the feed forward connection, but the learning mechanism that we have shown is for the excitatory connection, for the feed forward connection, not for the inhibitories. Any other questions? Yes? Yes. The thing is that all the inputs, yes, I mean the sum total of that has to be less than 1. Yes. Sum total. I mean the xj also has to follow that constraint. Whatever constraint is there with wkj, yes, the same constraint xj also has to follow. You are very correct. Function of feedback connection. Yeah, we did not use it over here, but feedback connections are inhibitory, means that this will further strengthen the winner and this will weaken the losers. Okay.
But you have not talked about the weight.
We did not talk about the weights of the inhibitory connections. Whatever learning rule we have shown, that is only for the feed forward connections. It is only for these that we have shown the learning rule. All right. Thank you very much.